Okay, hey guys, welcome back. We're back with videos. We had a little bit of a break while we were working on that Odyssey essay, but now that is done. That should be submitted at this point. If it is not, please get that done. I'm going to start grading those immediately. So if I get to you and you have an essay submitted, it's going to be late. So please make sure that you get that submitted so that I can get it graded as soon as possible. Okay, so what we are moving into now is our unit on William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Like I mentioned on that mandatory Zoom call, we only have 14 days, or actually technically 13 days left to be really working through Romeo and Juliet. So we need to get going right away, jump straight into it so that we can get started. Now, if we were in class, you would have gotten this little white book that is our modern text and our parallel text. How this book actually works is on one side of the book, it is Shakespeare in English. On the other side of the book, it is modern English. I'm going to post a document for the different acts that has the different scenes in the modern and in the Shakespearean English, just like this book would, but you're not getting this book. And we will be kind of oscillating between reading the Shakespearean English and reading the modern English. As you probably have guessed, the modern English is really easy to read. The Shakespearean English is a little bit more difficult, a little bit more challenging. But we need to operate with both, experience both as we go through the story. First things first, we are going to do some notes today. I did not post a PDF to this form, so you need to, or this PDF or PowerPoint presentation. So you need to watch this video in order to fill out those notes. I ask you that you pay attention to this video and to these notes because you will be quizzed on these. These will pop up on your quizzes for Romeo and Juliet. So please make sure that you are aware of all of this stuff. Okay, we're going to start off with our introduction to good old William Shakespeare. This is his life and the Globe Theatre, which is the theater he built in order to perform these plays. So please make sure that you have your note sheet out as we are going through our intro to good old Shakespeare. Here he is, some portraits of what he might have looked like when he was at his prime, when he was at his most famous, whenever he was writing all of these plays. So, introducing William Shakespeare, early life and marriage. He was born in a place called Stratford upon Avon, that is in England. It's a place where you can go visit nowadays. Not a lot is known about his life, like at all, especially his early life, because if you're not born famous, who really cares? And there's not that many recorded information about people back then. So we have a general idea of when he was born and when he died, and that is from 1564 to 1616. It's actually said that he was born and died on the same day, which seems a little suspect. But those are the dates that he is supposedly born and died. Now, here's a little bit of a timeline of his life that is not including this birth and death, but he was born in 1564. He marries a girl called Anne Hathaway in 1582. Again, that is not going to be our iconic actress from The Princess Diaries. Not that Anne Hathaway, a different Anne Hathaway. Unfortunately, she's not that old, has not been blessing generations. In 1585, he moves to London. It's our capital of England. This kind of hub for the arts at this time when Elizabeth is the queen. In 1593, the plague closes theaters in London, so all performances stop, kind of basically what we're doing right now with coronavirus. And then in 1594, the Lord Chamberlain's Men is developed. It's a company of actors. Shakespeare's their primary writer. He writes the plays for them, and this company of actors performs them. Now, Queen Elizabeth I is the monarch in England at this time. She loves performances. She loves the theater. So she loves the Lord Chamberlain's Men. Then in 1603, the Lord Chamberlain's Men becomes the King's Men because Queen Elizabeth dies and King James I takes over, and he wants this group of actors to be named after him because he also enjoys this theater. Now, Shakespeare's family, his dad's name is John Shakespeare, and his mother's name is Mary Arden. He has 3 kids with Anne Hathaway, Hamnet, Judith, and Susanna. It's kind of funny he named that kid Hamnet because one of the plays that he will actually end up writing is called Hamlet. So those are his 3 children, his family. Now, education. He went to King Edward VI Grammar School. This is kind of like an elementary school kind of setup. When I say grammar school, he's not just learning grammar when he's there, but he went to King Edward VI Grammar School. Now, Shakespeare's actual works. This is what matters more to us than just this basic background information about his life. Shakespeare wrote 154 sonnets. Sonnets are poems. A sonnet is a 14-line poem, so every single one of those, all 154, were 14 lines. And they're written in iambic pentameter, which we're going to talk about in just a minute and what that means for our reading of Romeo and Juliet. Shakespeare tended to write in iambic pentameter a lot. And they have a rhyme scheme. It's A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, C, D, C, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. Pretty simple. Every single one of them is going to be the same for that iambic pentameter and then that rhyme scheme. Then he wrote 38 plays. Now that's what we're actually going to be really focusing on is his plays. And the play we're actually reading, Romeo and Juliet. I want you to keep in mind that this is not a novel. You're not going to talk about it like it's a book, like it's a novel. It is a play. It is meant to be seen. It is meant to be performed. So Shakespeare wrote 3 different categories of plays. The first category is the comedies. When I say comedy, it doesn't mean you're going to be rolling on the ground laughing because it's so funny. What I mean by comedies is that everything at the end gets tied together in this pretty bow, kind of unrealistic bow, but normally every character at the end gets married. So they have all of these problems throughout the start of their journey, so you might say. So something maybe bad happens to them, and then at the end, everything works out. An example there being A Midsummer Night's Dream. That's what I teach in English too. Some of you might read it in English too. But A Midsummer Night's Dream, everyone kind of falls in love with each other and no one loves them back. And they have this whole drama in the forest and there's fairies and everything. But at the end, everyone ends up marrying whoever they want to marry. And it works out and everyone's happy. The next category is going to be our tragedies. These tend to be our little bit more fun stories because they're so dramatic. Romeo and Juliet's a tragedy. Hamlet's a tragedy. Julius Caesar's a tragedy. You might end up reading Julius Caesar in English too. But the tragedies mean a lot of people are going to die. Most of the time, our main characters are going to die at the end. You know that going in because it's one of Shakespeare's tragedies. Then the last category is his histories. His histories kind of told the story, all of them, about different monarchs, different rulers in the UK. So we have Henry the Fourth, Henry the Fifth, Richard the Second, Richard the Third. So all of these are just basically these dramatic retellings of what actually happened in history. The histories tend to be least interesting in my opinion, and you don't actually get to read a lot of those in high school. You will read, I think, Henry V if you take AP English, but most of the times you really focus on the tragedies and then sometimes the comedies. Okay, so we're going to talk briefly about what an iamb is, an iambic pentameter, just so that we have this knowledge of how Shakespeare was writing this language whenever he was writing Romeo and Juliet. So an iamb is a metrical foot of one stressed and unstressed syllable. You should know what a syllable is. Every word has a certain amount of syllables. You can only check by clicking along with you whenever you're saying those syllables aloud. I'm going to show you an example of what that might look like. But Shakespeare wrote every single one of, or not every single line, but a lot of his lines. And whenever he was writing in metrics, when he was writing in this kind of verse, he was writing with iambic pentameter. What that means is that every line, this is a line from one of his sonnets, every line is made up of 5 metrical feet. What that means is that a metrical foot is one unstressed syllable and one stressed syllable going together. It kind of gives this rhythmic pattern to the language. So if you look at this with the unstressed and the stress, I'm going to say it out loud and you should be able to hear it. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? So that is that unstressed, stressed syllable going together to make this metrical foot. So his poetry all reads like that. The shall I compare thee to a summer's day? And that's why a lot of his words that he writes has this kind of musicality to it, so that it flows together and reads pretty easily. That's what iambic pentameter is going to be there. The reason why we have that pentameter word on there, penta we know means 5. It's one of our STEM words from this semester. So there's going to be 5 of them, 5 of these metrical feet, and that is the unstressed and the stressed. And then that word iamb is coming from the fact that it is an unstressed and a stressed together, not a stressed stress or an unstressed unstressed or a stressed unstressed. It's just the unstressed comes first and then the stressed. Okay. And then the X is not actually the symbol you would use to mark an unstressed syllable. It's just for this PowerPoint's purposes. It was really hard to do the little basically flattened U, which is what you would actually use to mark that unstressed syllable. Okay, now Shakespeare was a wordsmith, is what we called him. That means he made up a bunch of words and then made them into an actual word. So a lot of the words that we use today were actually written by Shakespeare for the first time. And some examples on here: amazement, eventful, majestic, hurry, generous, lonely. These were words that Shakespeare came up. He created them for his purposes. And then there's some phrases he came up with too. All that glistens is not gold, catch a cold, naked truth, leapfrog, breaking the ice, fair play. All of those things were actually written by Shakespeare. Now, in 1623, his first folio was published. He had already died at this point, but it is these 2 publishers, John Hemmett and Henry Condell. They looked at all of Shakespeare's work, said there's not actually a collection of them, and put them all together and organized them with the histories, the comedies, and the tragedies. And that's how people could actually start to study Shakespeare's plays. And that was in 1623. Now, the Globe Theatre. The Globe is this theater where predominantly Shakespeare's plays would be performed. It is still standing today. It's still operational today. I've actually been to the Globe Theater. It's an awesome experience. I've actually seen 2 plays there, and I actually got to study at the Globe Theater. So it is a super awesome place. We're going to talk a little bit about it. So in 1576, the first real theater is built by James Burbage. Before this, plays were performed in inn yards and homes of nobles. So 1576 is when theater, or actual physical theater space, was developed, where someone could go see something performed, and people could actually perform these plays in an actual, what we call, theater. So 3,000 people would go in and out of these theaters. It was very popular. It was a place you wanted to go. It was the entertainment that you really wanted to see. Now, there were 0 female actors. It was actually illegal against the law for women to perform. So that means that whenever these plays were performed, the female characters, which there are a lot in Shakespeare's plays, were played by men, typically young men with high-pitched voices that could actually pass off as a woman. So if we consider our play Romeo and Juliet, we had Romeo, played by a man, and we had Juliet, normally played by a younger child as well. So men were playing these female roles. Again, we have this plague that closes theaters in 1593, 1608, 1603. And again, kind of like what we're dealing with right now, it just closed these common spaces. Now, everyone went to enjoy the theater. Commoners are low-level, low-class people, the gentry, nobles, even the royals. Queen Elizabeth had her like special little box she would sit in to watch these plays. So they were accessible to anyone. Anyone could go. The Globe itself, we see this little image here. It is made out of wood. We have this stage in the front, and then we have this pit on the ground. And then behind that pit, we have these different levels of seating, typically 3, which are called the galleries. So it's 3 stories high. The main stage was 5 feet high. 2 side doors were at stage level. So that ground in front of the stage is actually called the pit. Our groundlings would sit there. They'd only pay a penny to go. It was pretty accessible for anyone who could find a penny, and you can go to see one of these plays. And for 2 pennies, the more well-to-do could sit in the 3 levels of the balconies or the galleries. The Globe is still really cheap to actually go see a performance. They wanted to kind of maintain that accessibility so anyone could go to the Globe. So you can go see a play and stand in the pit, which means you do have to stand for the entirety of the play, which is what I did. And it sounds horrible, but it's actually pretty doable once you're kind of entranced in the performance. But it only costs like £5, which is about $6. So it's very cheap to go see a performance. If you want to actually have a seat up in the galleries, which typically your view doesn't tend to be as good as it does if it's in the pit, but you can sit in one of the galleries, one of those balconies, for anywhere from like £20 to £30. So not that bad for going to see one of these performances. But I do want you to remember, there was no air conditioning. There was no heating. So during the winter months, it was really cold. During the summer months, it was really warm. There still isn't. The Globe kind of wants to maintain this sense that this still Shakespearean times whenever you step in and get to see one of these performances. So in 1613, the Globe went up in flames. There was a cannon used during a performance of one of Shakespeare's plays, and it actually kind of, the cannon shot off, caught the whole place on fire, it burned down. And then they just had to rebuild it. So technically, the Globe that is there now is not the official Globe when Shakespeare was performing. So the Puritans closed the theater in 1642. Again, though, it did reopen. It is open now. Okay, the audience itself. Shakespeare's audience was made up of all social classes, like I just talked about. The groundlings, those people who were in the pit, would talk through performances. They would throw food at the actors. They'd bring tomatoes, all of that kind of stuff. It was interactive theater that it, like, thrilled them. And people loved to watch. If the play was bad, they would throw food. If the play was really great, they would talk and cheer and yell. You don't see that much with theater nowadays. Theater is more refined. You have to dress nicely. You have to be quiet during the whole thing. Your phone better not go off. But during this time, people were kind of rowdy during these performances. Then the rich were protected from the rowdiness because they were up on their balconies, and the richest nobles had the option of sitting on a chair on the side stage. You could actually be on the stage during the performance. Okay, so that is our introduction to the Globe Theater and to Shakespeare. It's a pretty quick overview, but make sure you have all of those notes on there. If you missed any of them, I recommend you go back now before we get started on our notes on elements of drama. Now, these notes are not going to take very long, but this is just going to introduce you to a few of the terms that we will be talking about throughout this entire unit, and I need you to actually be aware of right here at the start. So please have your note-taking guide still out because you're going to be continuing notes on there. So what is a drama? A drama is a narrative or storytelling written for performance. That is the one thing I try to drill into your brains here. This is not a book. This is a play, basically like a script that has been written to be performed. That's why it's kind of weird when we sit down to study Shakespeare, because it was never made, it was never written to be read. It was written to be performed. So it actually make more sense if we were going to see Romeo and Juliet. But that is why I do a lot of acting in my class, while we were going to actually be acting out some of Romeo and Juliet, but now we obviously can't do that. But keep your eyes out for an extra credit assignment that will be coming up. A drama is a play, a story written to be performed by actors on a stage. They feature characters or these personalities played by actors. And most of the time, these main characters face a conflict, as with any story, that kind of contributes to their rising action and their climax. That is what people want to see, that typical storytelling aspect of a story. Now, continuing your notes on what is a drama, a plot is a sequence of events. We've talked about plot before. I just want to make sure that you have that in your mind. The highest point of interest occurs is the climax. We've also talked about that. And as the story winds down, the resolution of the conflict leads to the conclusion of the play. So just because it's a play doesn't mean that it doesn't fit into that wonderful plot diagram. It still does. And I'm actually going to show you that it fits in a little bit more perfectly into that plot diagram than most things do, especially Shakespeare's plays. So I already talked about this, but here's just some notes so you have it concrete. A tragedy faces the downfall of a main character, often known as the tragic hero. They're admirable, but they're defeated by a tragic flaw, a mistake, or a character defect, which we're going to see in Romeo and Juliet. Tends to be their dramatic flaw, or their tragic flaw is the fact that they are so in love with each other. Hamlet's is that he has his excessive pride and his inability to make a decision. A comedy has a happy ending. It usually features a series of events in which order is disrupted, and then a comic ending restores order and harmony. That comic ending normally being the fact that everyone perfectly just gets married. So here is how Shakespeare's plays fit perfectly into this plot diagram. Act 1 tends to be your exposition. You're learning about the characters, learning about the situation. Act 2 is that rising action, the drama starting to unfold. Act 3 is that climax, it's that high point. Act 4 is the falling action, and Act 5 is that resolution to the play. It fits perfectly into the different 5 acts. Every one of Shakespeare's plays is 5 acts long. Again, most of the time, Act 3 is going to be your longest because it's that climax, and Act 4 is technically going to be your shortest. It's normally how it works out. But again, those can vary. So in dramatic works, there are 3 main types of dramatic speeches. This is something I want you to please note. I'm going to talk about it a bunch of times as we go through this unit. First one is a monologue. A monologue is a long, uninterrupted speech delivered by a character to other characters on the stage. So basically, the character who is delivering a monologue is giving a speech, while other characters, other actors, are listening to that speech. Then a soliloquy is a speech in which the character alone on the stage reveals their private thoughts that the audience is allowed to overhear. Basically, what that means is that they know no one else is around, and they're basically just talking to the audience, or they're talking to themselves. They're talking about their plans, they're talking about their inner thoughts. That is the way you kind of learn about these characters, because we're not technically supposed to be reading this. The actor has to show you what the character's thoughts are, and the way they do that is by speaking them out loud. Kind of unrealistic. You don't tend to normally do that while you're walking around your house being like, oh, I'm so hungry, I gotta eat. Revealing that inner thought. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But that would be a soliloquy if no one else is listening. And then an aside is basically like a mini soliloquy. It's just a brief remark a character makes to the audience rather than to those characters. So they could be talking to the characters, and then they could turn around and be like, wow, this guy is like super annoying. And then turn back and start talking to the guy again and be like, oh my God, I can't stand this guy. And then talk to the guy again. Those little moments where they're turning to the audience and mentioning those things about that other character they're talking to, or about any situation, is going to be called that aside. Okay. Now, there are some vocabulary terms that you need to be aware of for this unit. This is the only vocabulary you will have this entire unit, but you will be quizzed on it. So please make sure you get these definitions down. First one, or the first 2 actually, technically, I'm just going to talk about them together, is acts and scenes. So Romeo and Juliet, all plays, all of Shakespeare's plays in general, are broken down into acts. Most of the time with musicals and plays that you see nowadays, it's just 2 acts, Act 1 and 2, with an intermission in between for you to go use the bathroom. But Shakespeare's play is 5 acts. So acts are just the basic units of organization in a drama. Remember, I just showed you Shakespeare kind of organized his around that plot diagram, the exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. Those are his basic units of organization: Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4, Act 5. And then scenes. Acts are often further divided into scenes. Scenes may move the action to a new setting or a time of day, may introduce new characters, or may shift a play's mood. So we'll see a lot in Romeo and Juliet. Maybe in the start of one of the acts, the first scene sees Romeo. And the second scene sees Juliet doing her thing. And then the third scene sees them together. So basically, the scenes just shift the location, shift the characters that are involved, and so that the play can continue moving forward. So, dramatic effect is the illusion of reality. Dramatic effect allows viewers to believe in the events of the story even though they know it is fake. So, a play, a musical, tries to have this dramatic effect that when you go see it, it seems to be real. That at least for the 2+ hours you were sitting in your seat in that theater, you believe that what you were seeing is this reality, the story they are telling. And then theme is the deeper meaning or insight about life. We've talked about theme a bunch. I just wanted to make sure that it is on there. Now, allusion, an expression designed to call something to mind without mentioning it explicitly. An indirect or passing reference. We've talked about allusion before, and we were in our short story unit at the start of the semester. But an allusion is just that reference to something else. It might be a reference to a Bible, it might be a reference to another play, another work, another movie, TV show, anything. I mentioned Bible because a lot of the times, especially in Shakespeare, but especially in this older literature we're reading, there are a lot of allusions to religious works. And hyperbole is an exaggerated statement or claim not meant to be taken literally. When you say, oh, I'm starving, but you're not literally starving because you had breakfast that morning, you're just hungry now because it's not yet dinner time. Iambic pentameter is a line of verse with 5 metrical feet. We just talked about it. I'm not going to go through that again. Just make sure it's one of those terms that you are aware of. An oxymoron is a figure of speech in which apparently contradictory terms appear in conjunction. So faith, unfaithful kept him falsely true. If you put those two words together, falsely true. True and false are different words. You put them together, they contradict each other. Prose is written or spoken language in its ordinary form without metrical structure. So basically what that means is that you're not having any kind of rhythm, no rhyme scheme, no pentameter, no meter at all. And so prose is basically just story, what you're reading. It's what you normally see in most novels. That's just prose. I'm going to skip down. Verse is writing arranged with metrical rhythm. That's what you're going to see in Shakespeare's play. It has that iambic pentameter, it has that meter, it has that rhyme scheme. So it's written in verse. Shakespeare does move between verse and prose as well. And then a pun is a joke exploiting the different possibility meanings of a word or the fact that there are words which sound alike but have different meanings. You're probably very aware of what a pun is. You probably use puns in your life. It's typically those dad jokes that aren't really funny, but you're expected to laugh at. Okay, so those are our vocabulary terms. That is the end of these notes. Please make sure that you have all of those blanks filled out. Remember, you will be quizzed on those notes and these vocabulary words. So I want you to be fully aware and cognizant of that before you get to that quiz. Okay, that's it for these notes today, guys. Thanks.